Right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I know that people are signing on, but we're going to really just jump right into things here because we've got a lot to cover in the 2 hour block that we've set up for this webinar. Just for your awareness, we are recording the webinar, and we do that for internal quality control purposes. And we may be able to share that from today's session. We'll let you know. Um, my name is Sean Beddoes. I am the Vice President of Global Services at CT Strategies. I spent 22 years in CBP, 6 of them specifically in the CTPAT program. My colleagues joining me here today also had long careers at CBP, which included significant time working in this CTPAT program as well. In fact, Brad Skinner, Ron May, and Mike Ginn here, and we also all served as program directors or acting directors at some point during our time with the CTPAT program. We asked you all to submit questions in advance, and I must commend you all for doing just that. We've received well over 130 questions for today's session. We tried to group them together into themes or categories so that we'll be able to kind of cover these questions in different blocks. So please be patient if you submitted a question. Chances are we will get to it. Just for your awareness, the categories that we've grouped them into are program changes and looking into the future, validations, record keeping, business partners, security profile and MSC compliance, the portal, transportation and physical security, training and awareness, AEO, PIP, and mutual recognition, merging, consolidating accounts, 3PL, risk assessment, trade compliance in tier 3, and then just other questions that didn't fall directly into those categories. As I said, we have only 2 hours today. We're going to try our best to get through these questions. If at the end of the session there's still a significant number of questions remaining, we may decide to schedule a continuation of this webinar in the coming weeks. If there's just a small number left over, then we can provide those via email after the session. So we'll just have to figure it out as we go. As a reminder, we also run a LinkedIn post series called CTPAT Monday, where we answer a CTPAT question every week. And finally, you can still ask questions here using the Q&A tab here in Zoom, and we'll try to address them during the session. We expect that some of the questions that may get asked during the session were already submitted in advance. So just be patient with us if we don't respond to your question in Zoom right away. It may be because we know that that's a question that we're going to be answering a little later in the session. Okay, so let's just jump right into it. Program changes and looking into the future. So I'm going to group a few similar questions together here. Can we anticipate any changes to the CTPAT program and their benefits during this administration? What will be the most significant changes to CTPAT in 2026? And is a new MSC document in the works? So it's certainly difficult to predict, what the administration will or will not do in terms of CTPAT. What we can say is historically, changes in administrations have had little to no impact on the CTPAT program directly. For the most part, the program remains the same as when it started over 20 years ago, with the most significant changes being when the Safe Port Act of 2006 was established, and that gave the timelines and requirements for the program. And then, as you all are probably familiar with, the minimum security criteria overhaul in 2020, which was a result of several years of work from a COAC working group. So in terms of upcoming changes, there's really none that we're aware of. And we keep a very close ear to the program through our contacts and our interactions with key officials. So we have not heard of any changes. Something that could impact some things in 2026, as one of the parts of that question indicated, is kind of the bleed over or results from the government shutdown. So the longer that shutdown, the longer that shutdown continues, it could impact the validation work plan that CTPAT has established, which could, members could see changes to validations that they have scheduled. They could see changes to the type of validation. It could go from in-person to virtual potentially, and certainly the flexibility that typically you see in terms of the validation scheduling could be impacted. And we've seen that in the past with the shutdowns or budget issues where they say, hey, we want to conduct a validation with your business partner in Taiwan, but we need to do it on November 18th, and we really can't move that schedule. So just be aware of that. And then finally, in terms of the new MSC, there are no changes that we're aware of. I mean, CTPAT does say that they review the MSC and will update it as necessary, but certainly there's no massive overhauls to the MSC in the works that we're aware of. Okay, moving on to validations. Are virtual validations the new norm? Absolutely not. They're not the new norm in terms of they don't replace the in-person validation, but virtual validations are certainly a new tool that the CTPAT program has been using since the pandemic and continues to use as a tool for revalidations based on specific CTPAT internal risk assessment criteria. First-time validations must be done in person, and they must be done for the next revalidation after a virtual validation has occurred. So by rule, you won't see two virtual validations in a row. But going back to my earlier comment about the impact of the shutdown, anything can happen. So certainly there could be a scenario where you could see two virtual validations if all of the parameters indicated that was possible. So just something to be aware of. But no, virtual validations are not the new norm in terms of replacing the validation process, but they are one of the tools, and all indications are they will continue to use that moving forward. Next question is, as we prepare for upcoming validations, are there any new focus areas or common pitfalls CBP has identified? So comprehensive seal procedures are always an area that produce recommendations and actions required during validations. This is a critical aspect of the program and the minimum security criteria. So it should absolutely be paramount that companies are preparing for a validation, that they have this process well established and well documented. That's what we see. What we've seen previously when we were doing the CTPAT work, and it's what we still see now supporting clients during validations. In your experience, what is the most common findings resulting from an initial validation? So I'm sure my colleague Ron is going to be nodding his head here, but we say this over and over again, but it's simply the truth. It's just documentation is always the issue. So most companies are doing so many of the things that the program requires, but they fail to properly or effectively document it through written policies, procedures, reports, checklists. When the supply chain security specialists are coming out to your facility or virtually visiting the facility, they want to see the documents that support all these processes and procedures. Yes, you do, or you should have uploaded those documents into the portal as evidence of implementation, but most certainly they're going to also be looking for some samples during that validation. Next question, how to respond to a request for an in-person validation when all operations and employees are currently remote? This is, if the person's on the line that asked this question, this is a very specific and very unique question. The short and easy answer is, you have to coordinate with your supply chain security specialist. But I would invite whoever asked this question to please reach out to us via email and or call us, and we can take this one offline because that's going to be a very unique kind of situation. And the question doesn't give us enough information about the operation to really answer it properly. What is the format of the foreign on-site revalidation? Well, the format specifically can vary based on the type of operation being visited, although in most cases, we're talking about a supplier or a manufacturer being visited. That said, it can also vary considerably based on the supply chain security specialist, and not in terms of inconsistency between specialists, which we recognize is an issue uh, on its own, but really based on the relationship that the specialist has with the account. If you've had the same specialist for, say, 15 years versus a newly assigned one, the level of experience they have with the account can impact the way they approach the foreign site validation. So even if it's a new foreign site being visited, it can really impact the way that what they focus in on for the validation. So you should always be able to expect a visit of several hours with interviews of all the key department heads or personnel, and certainly a physical tour of the site. That's going to happen every time at a foreign on-site revalidation.
Hey, Sean, can I jump in? Because there's a
Absolutely.
question kind of
Absolutely.
related.
Yep.
Someone put a question, if a CTPAT member is due for validation and is also a member of PIP, which is Partners in Protection from Canada, will PIP pick up those on-site validations if possible? I'm assuming will they attend? I was the director of the Buffalo CTPAT field office for a number of years, probably in the hundreds of validations we did. And remember, we have that mutual recognition with the Canadian PIP program. We probably had PIP, I'll call them secure supply chain security specialist attendance at 1 or 2%. So very minimal. Is it possible? Yes. Is it something they're going to utilize on a regular basis? I think that's going to probably be dependent upon, many things, the locality and the availability. But so it's possible, but I don't think it'll be something that you'll see a lot of urgency for. Sorry, Sean.
No, thank you. No need to apologize. All right. Is it possible to have more than one validation to the same company during the same year? Yes, it is possible. It's not common, but CTPAT will occasionally make more than one visit during the same year, for several reasons. If a company had a security incident or a significant change to the operation or the facility. But in reality, this would most likely occur because the team was already in the area conducting other validations. So, yes, can it happen? Does it happen? Absolutely. I would say it's pretty rare that it happens, and it only happens when there's a reason to do it. You won't find sort of like a random, two-time visit of a CTPAT member. Okay, what are the most common security gaps found during CTPAT validations, and how can companies proactively address them? Certainly, it's hard to pinpoint that, but typically during the validation is when it becomes evident if a company or their business partners who are part of that validation aren't actually doing what they said they were doing in the security profile. Some common issues are really around access control rules not being followed, security technology audits not being conducted, some training not being conducted or effective based on performance observations, etc. The best way to protect yourself is by conducting a mock validation in advance and certainly doing a facility walkthrough the day before or the morning of the validation. So just some things to be aware of there. During a revalidation, have you seen a company perform container inspections electronically, i.e., iPads? Yes. So, if you mean, do they capture the results electronically? Yes, I've seen companies utilize a tablet or iPad to help facilitate a standard and efficient inspection process. And so CTPAT wants you to conduct those inspections. They would like you to document those inspections. So if you're doing that electronically and there's evidence, right, that those electronic records are going somewhere, then that's perfectly fine. I think Brad, you also had a recent experience with that. I don't know if you wanted to make a comment.
No, you covered it. In the Mexico supply chain, especially cross-border, uh, definitely have seen it 2 or 3 times in my own direct experience. So it's happening at least in the Mexico supply chain that I have seen.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to take a break from speaking here for a moment. This next question is from the other category, but it's something that Mike can speak to specifically. So I wanted to address it earlier than later, just in case we run up on a time issue. So, Mike, this is for you. I am an importer and I use CTPAT sea carriers. What exactly is the Aqualane benefit? Is this is that just the benefit for sea carriers, and does it impact my shipments at all? Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Sean. The Aqualane benefit actually does benefit other members in the supply chain. A quick history, Aqualane is the Advanced Qualified Unlading Approval. And it basically came about when the sea carriers approached us and said, hey, look, everyone's got a benefit in CTPAT, but we really don't. And we're the ones who are kind of carrying the load here is the main transportation in the United States. So we started working on it, and I did a lot of research, and we traveled quite a bit to different ports. And one thing I tell you that CBP is guilty of across the board is, we do things one way in Newark, we do it another way in Savannah, another way in Miami, and maybe Long Beach. So, I've always heard companies say, well, I got a guy in Newark who can find out, and I got a guy in Long Beach who can find out. So what Aqualane did was, it was an attempt to try to bring conformity to all the different ports with this benefit and make things across the board much simpler. And basically what it came down to, some ports would allow a vessel, say, example, a vessel came in at 4 o'clock in the morning into Newark, and Newark would allow them to go ahead and start unlading the vessel prior to CBP showing up and doing the immigration checks on crew members. Other places, Miami, the vessel coming at 4 o'clock in the morning and sat for 4 hours. And in Long Beach, when I went out there, I was really surprised when I found out that, if the vessel was scheduled coming at 4 o'clock in the morning, they would hire the longshoremen, and some of those crews, would take 4 or 5 different crews for, depending on the size of the vessel, and they could be sitting around at, upwards of $25,000 an hour for 5 crews waiting for CBP to arrive, because the carriers did not want to take a chance if CBP was there to then try to get the longshoreman crews to come over. Then there'd be a delay. So you had these folks sitting around for 4 hours getting paid, which wasn't cost effective. Security wise, it wasn't the best thing for us to have other transportation workers hanging around the vessel for hours at a time waiting for CBP to show up. So basically what we came up with was an idea that if the sea carriers would agree to a minimum of different criteria they had to meet to get Aqualane approval, it could be granted and stuff. So, and the other thing it did, it also helped CTPAT clean up a lot of issues, because at the time, the marine port terminal operators were not joining CTPAT. They saw no need for it. If you're a terminal operator on the grounds at the seaport, they didn't have a lot of choices of where to take the containers, so there was no rush for them to join. Well, that was number one thing that we mandated, that the terminal operators had to join CTPAT. And as we were going along, Mr. Skinner was our director at the time. He said, hey, look for other things that we could add on to it. So we went through and made sure the ISF requirements were mandated. Then agriculture reached out to me and said, hey, they have all these certificates they're supposed to have for us. We can't really do anything if they don't have it. It's a compliance, but we would like to see if so we attached the Asian gypsy moth and any other certificates they had to this. Um, Garbage processing was a big problem in some ports. We added that. They had to be compliant in their international garbage offload. So we took all these factors and lined them up and said, hey, if you can do these things, we'll grant you Aqualane approval. So it turned into be a very large benefit. I mean, when you think about the amount of money, first of all, savings wise, second of all, the vessels, the maritime associations were telling me some of the benefits that we weren't even thinking about. If you got a vessel making a 2 week trip across the ocean and stuff, and they know that they have a certain time they have to be there, and if they can calculate that on their chart plotters and GPSs, they can actually slow a vessel down if they need to. They don't have to rush. They don't have to guess when CBP will be there, and there were savings there. Um, and the other thing for importers, if you think about this, if you're an importer, a medium to large importer, and you're bringing in dozens, if not hundreds of cans on a vessel, and now your containers are moving 4 hours earlier through your supply chain, going to your distribution center, being cross dock, emptied, cross dock, however you're going to handle it, and now those containers are back in play 4 hours earlier over a 12-month period. That whole process can add up and stuff. So um, I've been out for a little bit, but I still get calls from people saying how it's a great thing. You really don't want to be the sea carrier who messes this up because it's a huge benefit. And we made it very simple. All sea carriers had to submit a 3171 advanced approval for unlading, and we just took the other box on there, and they request Aqualane, and the port director or his designee gives approval, so they know well in advance that they have the approval. They can have the logistics set up, the truck drivers, the ILA, everyone they need and stuff. So I think it's turned into a win for everyone. And the other thing is, as an importer, you should be asking your sea carrier, are they utilizing the Aqualane privilege? Because, the 21 major ports in CBP are authorizing it. So this port doesn't accept it. That's not an excuse and stuff. So you should ask your sea carrier because, again, if they're doing all these things, they've tightened up their security chain even more. And if they're not willing to do these things, you kind of got to ask yourself why. So I think it's a big benefit, a win for all. Thanks.
Awesome, Mike. Thank you very much for that deep dive on Aqualane. And yeah, I think people don't realize that the benefit, even though it's a sea carrier benefit, it really encompasses kind of everybody participating in that supply chain that they end up benefiting from it. I'm just going to real quickly pivot, Ron, before I go to you. This question came in about the photo ID. CTPAT requires visitors must present photo identification for documentation when arriving on site. It does not specify what kind of photo identification. We're seeing more drivers from Mexico with Mexico photo ID. We're still validating photos with the person. Any issues accepting outside of the United States photo ID, even though CTPAT does not specify. So CTPAT does specify, but they also give you flexibility. So they do say the drivers must present government issued photo identification. So they're looking for some form of official photo ID, right? That's issued by a government body. And it doesn't say US government, so it could be the Mexican government, but it also gives flexibility where it says if presenting government issued photo identification is not feasible, the employee may accept a recognizable form of photo ID. So there is flexibility there. Hopefully that answers the question. Ron, over to you. How long do I have to keep files to comply with CTPAT? I'd also like to know how I should store them all physically.
Okay, well, CTPAT doesn't really have a specific identified amount of time they want you to keep documents. CBP mandates 5 years for record retention for activity or entry in accordance with 19 CFR 163. That's specific outline requirements for that for merchandise entry. Of course, foreign-based entities should follow the guidelines of their specific organization or agency as far as the rules. As far as documents related, we're going to, container inspection, CCTV. The benchmark, the rule of thought there is usually 90 days. That allows for documentation of the activity. Also, more importantly, if there's an incident or an anomaly occurs, there's enough time to use that to go back and do an investigation. Now, records can be stored. Obviously, there's more electronic storage of documents now because it's easier, especially like CCTV. In the old days, you had videos, and it was really a lot of effort. So electronic recording is done. If you do have manual storage of documentation, most important, make sure that documentation is updated in accordance with the other documents. So don't create a manual, an SOP, leave it at a doc, and then leave it there for 8 years. Meanwhile, electronically, you're updating that SOP. That's the kind of a gotcha that can happen. Also, make sure that any manual documentation has specific processes for storage and protection. Just like electronically, we have those precautions in place. So basically, as I say, I think 90 days is a benchmark aside from the regulation from CBP allowing you. And of course, discussing that with your supply chain security specialist is also another method.
Great. Another one for you, Ron. How many months or years of records should be available for review?
Yeah, again, not having a specific definition from CTPAT, 90 days. I think that, when they ask for visitor records or access controls or, CCTV footage, it seems like the 90-day window is enough to satisfy. You can keep more. Now, again, with the electronic storage capabilities, many companies are able to store massive amounts of documentation. So that's fine. Some records are inherently stored longer. We find personnel records, audit records, some incident reports may be stored for years and years, and that's acceptable.
Thanks. I'll take this next one. How do most companies store their CTPAT information, especially when they include embedded CTPAT data in operations SOPs? So CTPAT information is really just your company's information, which the company stores it however their internal policies require them to do that. The relevant policies and procedures for the CTPAT compliance and evidence of implementation that gets uploaded into the portal. So some of your policies and procedures that are supporting CTPAT compliance are going to be living in as well in the portal, but there's no sort of requirement where you've got to where you have to have that information stored within your own company. So just make sure that you've uploaded all the relevant and pertinent information into the portal. Ron, is there an issue with if there is an issue with your annual submission or validation, how long do you have to correct it?
So for the validation, which means, I'm assuming if you have it in person, the SCSS is out there or doing the virtual, the correction of the issue is really kind of dependent on what the issue is, how serious it is, and what the SCSS says. So obviously, if it's a validation, at the conclusion of the validation, the SCSS will have a summation or a closeout, identify everything they've found. You can begin the corrective action at that point. You also have to file a 90-day response to the validation once the report is issued. So you can use that window as kind of a measurement of what you need to fix. And again, it may be, we need to update pictures on something versus the gate is broken and we need to fix the entrance gate into the yard. So that would obviously elicit a more aggressive action or more dynamic need to fix something. For the annual submission, that's again something you should communicate with your SCSS. For example, our IT system is undergoing a major renovation. As we have our annual review due this period, that renovation will not be completed. That's something you may want to discuss with the SES, maybe identify in your security profile update. Again, or it may be something that, how would you advise us moving forward? We're thinking about putting a fence in, discuss with the SCSS what's the timeline on it. Understanding that projects take time to secure funds and get completed.
Thanks. Just for the listeners or attendees, we've got three questions in the hopper right now. Some we'll address as we get to those sections, but this one that just came in is relevant for this conversation. If the physical copies of documentation have a disclaimer, not valid 24 hours after printing, are time-stamped, is that enough to work around the physical copy matching the electronic copies, just in case someone has an old physical copy? If I understand it correctly, which I may not, yeah, I don't see any issue with that whatsoever in terms of the scope of CTPAT taking a look at some of the documents. I don't know, Ron, if you have, or anybody else has another opinion, but on the surface, that sounds perfectly fine to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as long as the documentation has a lineage and shows what's going on, what it's done, I'm going to steal some thunder, but later on, you're going to hear the mantra over and over again. If it's not documented, it doesn't exist. So that proves that there's documentation supporting the way the document may have some date issues.
Okay, great. Thank you. Brad, over to you. I've got some questions. How does, and moving into a different category here, business partners, how does CBP define a high-risk supplier, and what steps should companies take to manage those relationships?
Yeah, sure, Sean and colleagues. Good day from Houston, Texas. So I'm not aware of a definition of high risk per se that CTPAT provides. Each partner is going to assess its business partners differently, but generally speaking, you want to focus on those business partners whose geographic locality, their or any security shortcomings that they may have that could pose a significant threat to your supply chain, create a vulnerability for perhaps container contamination with narcotics, agriculture, forced labor, or terrorism, certainly. The key, of course, is to have a written and verifiable process to screen those business partners. If I were to drill down in just, I guess, in a little more detail, certainly focus on any suppliers located in countries with a history of political instability, high corruption, government overthrows. You would also want to focus, just new suppliers writ large, or any that might have undergone a change of ownership. Suppliers that you have found are not meeting CTPAT's minimum security criteria per its answers to the questionnaire that you send to them. For instance, they may answer, no, we're not containing or conducting container inspections. Well, right off the bat, that should be a red flag, something that you need to drill down on to further to confirm what they're doing and how to fix that. If your supply chain mapping determines that your suppliers are in a country or a particular area of a country, for instance, China, Xinjiang area, that is has a high prevalence of forced labor, that might be another indicator, right, of high risk for the company. At some point, you're going to have to make a judgment regarding risk, assign, some sort of low, medium, high designation to the supplier, and then using risk management, determine how you're going to follow up with the suppliers. And I guess with respect to the second part of the question, how to manage those relationships, certainly you're going to confirm the bona fides of the supplier through financial, social, compliance checks, confirm their credibility. We're also, and there's open source information that you can use. In the US, there's the consolidated screening list. Both DHS, the Department of Labor, have entity lists for forced labor. You can use that. But if I were to zoom out for a moment, what I've seen most times, companies will use a third party to do some sort of screening initially, just to ensure the bona fides of the company for financial purposes. You don't have to do that for CTPAT purposes, but a lot of companies I've seen do that. So I'll stop there, Sean.
Thanks, Brad. Over to you again for this one. What are the key security measures required for international suppliers?
Right. So my starting point here is, of course, CTPAT expects companies to push out and promote adherence to all of CTPAT's minimum security criteria for its foreign partners. As a high-level comment, I would hone in on the integrity and chain of custody piece, right? Who and how is the supplier or logistics provider physically handling my cargo? And then kind of turn your attention to the customs data side. Who and how is my customs transactional data being handled? If you're going to ask me to focus, where to focus efforts initially for due diligence investigation, I would just start with focus area 2 of the minimum security criteria. That is to say, container inspections, sealing procedures, procedural security, kind of that transactional data piece, and agriculture. Start there, and then turn your attention to focus area 3, physical security, guards, gates, lighting, the perimeter security. Make sure that the supplier seems to have a good posture in place, their access controls, personnel, and training. That's where I would start, Sean.
Great, thank you. And I realize I was typing as I'm sorry to everybody. I'm multitasking here. I'm trying to respond to some of the questions that are coming in by typing the responses, and I'm moderating here. So I'm sorry if you heard me typing while Brad was talking. Okay, Brad, another one for you. How is the best way to track the SVI from business partners?
Yeah, sure. Of course, the SVI is your best way to track your business partner's status, and that fulfills the MSC. What I have seen companies do is they'll create a spreadsheet and with their business partners, and then they'll periodically go into the portal. They'll monitor, kind of check the box, that particular partner, SVI, the company is still in good status, no issues, and just kind of manage it through a table matrix format. One of the things that came to my mind real quickly as I was thinking on this question, of course, CTPAT members, SVI monitoring, that's a must do. Make sure all of the relevant departments in your company and your organization are informing you, if you're the one responsible for the SVI monitoring, of any change or any new business partners being onboarded. You can't monitor what you don't know. And what I've seen is over time, there becomes a disconnect within the company. There's not that exchange of information from the kind of the onboarding departments, new vendors with the CTPAT folks. And so companies aren't being monitored the way they should be. And then that's going to, if that's discovered during the validation, that's going to contribute to a failed validation. So, make sure you're communicating within your company and doing that monitoring. But SVI is the way to go, kind of in a matrix format, I would say.
Great. Thanks, Brad. I'll take this next one. What is the minimum you want from a foreign manufacturer questionnaire who does not participate in AEO or OEA programs? So think about the supply chain here. The foreign manufacturer, in most cases, is the one who is ensuring that that container or the trailer is being properly inspected prior to the cargo being loaded in it and the seal being affixed. So you want to ensure that they're following your written inspection and seal procedures, or that they have their own that are in line with yours. and that they provide specific training to the staff responsible for those actions, so those inspections and the sealing procedures. And of course, you want to ensure that the facility is effectively equipped with physical security features and that access is limited and controlled. You want to make sure that their IT security is sufficient if they're handling your sensitive information. Um, when a foreign site is visited for a validation, most of the minimum security criteria apply, but not all of the minimum security criteria apply. Some of that MSC is specific for the US CTPAT member, and it does not apply to that foreign manufacturer. So I would say that you're going to have to ask, several questions related to the MSC, but very much you should be focused in on who is handling that cargo, who is conducting those inspections, how are they conducted, how's the training conducted, all of those things around the cargo being secure in the facility, into the trailer or the container, and then the related training. Hopefully that helped answer it. Brad, do we need to send MSC questionnaires to our domestic supply chain partners?
Right. So I guess as a starting point here, recall that CTPAT focuses on end-to-end supply chain security, kind of from the point of loading the container for export to the United States to the point of unloading the container. Domestic partners who are not part of your international supply chain probably don't need to be surveyed. And here I'm kind of thinking, for instance, like US component suppliers. Now, I'm assuming by broker, you're referring to a US customs broker. Certainly you want to verify whether they are in CTPAT via SVI monitoring. And if not, you're going to want to inquire, perhaps send a questionnaire regarding, how they're handling your customs data. This question tends to come up in the context of US domestic warehouse operations, especially I've seen it at the US-Mexico border. If that warehouse is receiving your cargo, opening the container, breaking seals, cross-docking operations, you want to verify their procedures, certainly. And that's where a questionnaire might be utilized.
Okay, another one for you, Brad. Should the business partners need to be physically audited at the site, or could they be virtually audited?
Yeah, like everything, it's going to depend upon risk. But virtually assessing a business partner's security is definitely in scope. I think CTPAT recognizes resources are an issue for all companies, and not all companies can, physically travel to verify the supplier. Just kind of to refresh here, the risk assessment process for non-CTPAT business partners, can take into account many factors: membership in foreign country supply chain security programs, certifications, written contractual confirmation, from the supplier, stipulations in the contract, questionnaires, and site visits. So I've seen situations where, a company will ask the supplier, based upon risk, to send photographs or even short videos if there's a question, right? It's about access controls or the perimeter security. So, that would be good. I've also seen it done via kind of Teams or Zoom, interacting with the supplier. Of course, it depends upon technology, the ability of the parties to be able to do that. But the key is, if you're doing it electronically, be sure you can document that, your online or virtual assessment. Record it or recap it afterwards, date, times, etc. Proof, right? And Ron mentioned that, right? If you can't document it, it didn't happen. So certainly you'd want to be sure you can document it. Just another kind of point here. A lot of times, companies will send out quality assurance employees to verify quality assurance of the manufacturing process to the foreign supplier. You can kind of tag on questions regarding CTPAT as a part of their audits, as to get a little more information that if the supplier is in essence. And yeah, I think that covers the basic points here. So, virtually assess, certainly in scope, just keeping in mind the points I laid out.
Okay, Brad, another one here. Explaining agriculture security to the supplier base, I guess, with a question mark. It's not there, but I guess it's a question.
Yeah, right. And I think this really gets to how do I push out CTPAT minimum security criteria, right, to my supplier base. And so let me just hit on some high points and kind of some tactics here. When you're talking with the suppliers, when you're educating them, certainly emphasize why agricultural security is important for the United States, but for all countries, right? Economic security, environmental security, and that CTPAT requires it. You can talk about, or share what, how do I, what is the definition of a pest? How to identify those pests in the container, nests, droppings, any residual material, seeds inside the container. You can talk about wood packaging material requirements, how it has to be ISPN 15. That's an international phytosanitary kind of certificate meeting the ISPN requirements. And then, how to inspect the container. Now, CTPAT provides basic information, slide decks that you can push out to your suppliers and just share it with them. Document it that you shared it with your suppliers. Hey, here's some basic training material. I've seen where companies include that agricultural security piece in their corporate inspection criteria or requirements for their supplier to follow. I think that covers it. Yeah, in that case, so cover the basics of CT or the agriculture, document that you provided that to your supplier, and go from there.
All right. Don't worry, Ron. We're going to get to you. All right. Here's a question. When we receive notice there's been a change to the CTPAT status of a business partner, should we find out what's causing the change? So I'm assuming you're talking about an SVI monitoring and you get a notification from the portal. Interestingly enough, this morning I got about 15 notifications in a row from the portal of a SVI status change. Because several of my clients happen to use the same business partner. So I immediately investigated it, and that is absolutely your responsibility to do that because the notification will not say what changed or why it changed, and that's for privacy reasons, right? It just simply says something has changed. But typically it changes for not good reasons. Not every time, but when you see that change, that could indicate that the company has been suspended due to either a security incident or administrative issues and not complying with program timelines. So yes, when you get that message, you should be reaching out to that business partner and say, hey guys, what's going on here? Next question. How should we onboard foreign suppliers or service providers that are not CTPAT certified? Well, this is, very common. And at the end of the day, you have to do your due diligence in terms of vetting those companies to ensure that they're good actors, legitimate businesses, and that they do or they can provide compliant security measures. So if your current process for onboarding new business partners does not take into account CTPAT security requirements, then that's absolutely something that you're going to want to update and introduce into those processes. Brad, back over to you. Can we report CTPAT partners that do not want to respond to questionnaires? Never. It's a little twisted there, but maybe you can get
Yeah,
the gist of it.
yeah. As I was thinking on this, so I mean, my starting point is you can always inform your supply chain specialist of anything suspicious that affects your supply chain and get his or her advice. But before doing so, consider that there could be some different reasons your supplier is not responding, back to you, the business partner. Maybe one possibility is the partner is already in CTPAT. They're just expecting that you're going to be monitoring them. So, first, are they a CTPAT eligible entity? Are they in CTPAT? Are you monitoring them? If so, that should take care of things, right? CTPAT, it's about partnership and networking amongst the business partners. So, consider calling the business partner up if you haven't already done so. Confirm the situation. Hey, why aren't you responding to my questionnaire? Now, and I think, Sean, you talked about this earlier, and there was a question somewhat similar. Some suppliers just get turned off if they receive a questionnaire that's got 150 questions. It's like it just goes over their head. They get overwhelmed. So you may have to think about, how do I focus or synthesize the questionnaire for that business partner to get that information that I need. Yes, I realize that that's more work, but you're more likely to get a response back from that questionnaire if you do so. It's your responsibility as a CTPAT member to ensure that the business partner is following the minimum security criteria, the SVI monitoring, certainly. Just one quick tangent here on this point that came to mind. What we've seen is companies that conduct audits of foreign suppliers and give them a designation of being CTPAT certified. Well, that may work from a business-to-business relationship, but that doesn't necessarily say that they're certified by the government. No one can go certify a company as being certified for CTPAT purposes except the government themselves, the supply chain specialist. But if you see something that's up, you need to drill down and have your facts in order, right? When you talk to the supply chain specialist, this is what I know. This is all the due diligence I've done to get that information. I'm just not able to get a response and then take it from there. Over to you, Sean.
Okay, Brad, another one here says supplier screening, auditing, security processes on site.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of context regarding this question, but I'm going to assume we're asking about which suppliers warrant further scrutiny and how to conduct that on-site audit. And we talked about this earlier, right? You're going to want to assess the supplier geographically based, financially based, compliant or responses to the security questionnaire, and then you're going to have to make a judgment call, right, regarding the risk for that supplier. And you can always start with manageable chunks, right? Take what you feel is the highest risk, 2 or 3 suppliers, and kind of go from there. The next year, another chunk of suppliers to drill down. But you want to be proactive. And then with respect to conducting the audit itself, the minimum security criteria is kind of the book, right, that we want to follow. I'm just, in this short webinar, I think my best advice here is, if you haven't already done so, take a look at this CTPAT Job 8 for conducting internal audit assessments. It's there within the portal, and it's actually on CTPAT's external website. That's going to give you a lot of questions broken down based upon minimum security criteria categories that you can use to start your audit process. We conduct security assessments all the time for companies, right? And I oftentimes refer back to that as kind of a structure or format to follow when conducting those audits. John?
Thanks, Brad. Looks like I got a couple here. How can we really know for sure our forwarders, brokers, land carriers, warehouses are following CTPAT regulations? Which I think may partially address one of the questions in the chat as well. So obviously, if any of them are CTPAT, then at least notionally, right, the way it's supposed to work, then you can be assured that they are meeting the requirements because they had to in order to be part of the program and to be successfully validated. And then your responsibility again is to monitor that status using the SVI tool in the portal. Additionally, if any of those business partners are in one of the 19 AEO programs that CTPAT has mutual recognition with, you can obtain evidence of their status, their certificate, or in some cases, you can actually look up the status in an online portal. We'll get to that. And then if they're not, you should try, if possible, to conduct site visits to confirm. Yes, the questionnaire is the most common way. And somebody asked on the chat, like, well, do I just trust those responses? That's a decision that you're going to have to make based on the kind of totality of the circumstances. I would just say this, that if you get responses back from a business partner and for whatever reason you're not confident that those responses are completely accurate, you should do some due diligence to do some additional checks to verify some of those responses, because ultimately any of those business partners are technically potential targets for inclusion in a CTPAT validation. So you certainly wouldn't want to find out the hard way that they're not compliant when CTPAT goes and visits that facility. Are Mexican business partners considered higher risk even if they are CTPAT or AEO certified? I would say that Mexico in general is considered higher risk, and that the companies operating in that area are they fall into that category. But certainly CTPAT and AEO companies should be considered lower risk compared to non-CTPAT or non-AEO companies in Mexico, because again, there's a standard that those companies are required to meet. It doesn't change the fact that they're operating within a high risk environment, but it does change their their individual risk level because they're meeting those requirements. How do CTPAT requirements differ overseas? Hold on a second. How do the CTPAT requirements differ between overseas vendors and business partners in the US? Well, the US CTPAT member is the one responsible for meeting the MSC and then ensuring that the relevant MSC are being met by overseas vendors and business partners. So in the context of CTPAT, let's be clear that CBP really has no authority whatsoever over a factory, for example, owned and operated by a Vietnamese company in Vietnam. CBP and the CTPAT program relies on the business leverage that you guys have as importers dealing with those companies overseas, to ensure that they're meeting the security requirements in the MSC that apply to them. Okay, so let's get
Hey,
Ron.
Sean, we've had
Yeah,
a number
please,
of
please.
questions regarding how do you talk to a partner if their SVI status changes? How do you approach them? My comment would be, remember, this is a business partner that you're supposed to be performing at a certain level anyways. So that should be a commonality of just why is the performance in question? Where's the issue? Also, many companies now have contractual language obligating CTPAT membership for a relationship. So I would say that if a business partner's SVI status changes, they are in violation of the business of the contract. They should be notifying you of that change. So I think it's something that's very important. I know some people are a little shy. We don't want to step on any toes, but it's an important asset to make sure you're very aware of what's happening within that chain. Thanks.
Sorry, thank you very much. Okay, let's switch over to some other stuff here. Security profile and MSC compliance. Ron, how to do the annual review of the security profile? This will be my first time.
Okay. It's actually fairly simple. Basically, your annual review notice will be sent 90 days to your anniversary date. That anniversary date is listed in your portal account. It'll show you very specifically what it is. So 9 days prior to that, you'll get your email from the system. And it simply says annual review required. Each section of security profile, when you go in and look at it, will all say annual review required. So whatever the approval was before, it kind of unsets. Each section of the profile will then have a small box at the bottom of it saying reviewed and complete. So it's unchecked. Your responsibility is to go in and look at all that criteria, all those 200 and plus minimum security criteria sections, and simply check the box. When you have reviewed each criteria and are satisfied after checking the box, I got to tell you a tip. I've worked on a lot of security profiles. Always save your work before you move to the next section. The portal is very mean about sometimes kicking you out or forgetting. So always take a second to, save that work before you move on to the next section. Once you've done your review and completed all the checks, it'll ask you if it's ready for submission, which is fine. I also get a lot of questions. Do I have to change anything? If everything's still the same, if the SOPs in place are the same, if the answer is the same, if there's been no changes, no, you don't have to make any addition. It's all still the same. What we're looking for in the annual review, CTPAT is looking for is updates. Maybe there's been a physical security change. There's been a new CCTV system installed. Maybe there's new IDs in place. Those are the things that are updates. If it's the same SOP and it's properly documented, then simply checking the box is your completed annual review. The annual review can only be submitted by one person. That's the I've identified point of contact for CTPAT in the system. So even if you were fortunate enough to bring us on to help you and I did your review and I checked all those boxes at the end, I do not have the ability to submit that document. That has to be done by the point of contact. And as always, before you submit it, if you have any questions, reach out to your SCSS and say, hey, is this something I need to update? Is this important? And just get their guidance. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Ron. I'll take this one. Is it mandatory to submit the security profile 90 days before the due date? Absolutely not. The profile is due on the due date. Any other submission prior to that is simply a good on you type of situation. I have seen where some specialists ask for you to submit it a little earlier. That's fine if they want to ask for that, and that's fine if you want to provide it earlier. But at the end of the day, the due date is the due date, and that's your requirement to get it in before the due date. Also, depending on when it's due, sometimes it falls at a bad time. Sometimes it falls. The due date is the week of between Christmas and New Year's, for example, or the due date is falling on a time where you have some major kind of like annual inventory happening or something significant in your operation. You can request extensions to that submission and just reach out to your supply chain security specialist to make that request. They typically will grant those requests if they're reasonable. Okay, Ron, what common mistakes should be avoided when documenting security procedures, best practices?
So another simple answer, never ever list anything that doesn't exist. Referencing something that's going to be done or anticipated, you can do that, but make sure you establish a date and you give a metric as to what the timeline is. But we never want to put anything in the security profile that's not in place, not in existence, for obvious reasons. During a validation, that will be tested. And if it's not in place, that's going to be a problem. That's going to be a negative, and it could actually lead to a failed validation. Also, citing corporate policies is okay. We have a corporate security policy, but if you have a different level of that policy in place, then you need to make sure you note that nuance. For example, I had a client, they had a corporate policy security, they had security guards. Their facility was located in a very, very, rural area, very quiet. They did not have a security guard service. That's okay, but if you list that corporate policy, which mandates you must have a security guard, and you don't, qualify why you're not meeting that corporate policy. I know we had a question or two regarding, do I need to re-upload and reassociate the same document over and over and over again in my annual review? We want you to upload and associate a document to each answer, even using the same document repetitively through the initial profile. But if that document has not changed, if the date is still valid and the content is still valid, you don't need to re-upload it again in the annual review simply to just put it in place. So putting that EOI, as we call it, evidence of implementation, putting it in place, documenting it, and then as long as it remains valid, it can stay attached to that criteria. We talk about best practices, and I've always said this. You need to treat the security profile not as a CTPAT specific document. Treat it as a core company document. Use it with all your SMEs. Make sure it's put out to be another manual or document that's updated on a continual basis. Not, oh, hey, CBP and CTPAT are coming next week. Pull up the drawer, get out the security profile, dust it off, and start working on it. Use it as a core document. One of the best ways to do this is engaging your SMEs, for example, your security personnel. Maybe there's a new CCTV system. They should be aware enough to notify the POC and say, hey, we're replacing our CCTV, therefore we probably need to update that security profile. Biggest mistakes, biggest errors we've seen in our time is one person show, somebody being responsible for everything. It's impossible. Not one person can know IT, security, personnel processes. So having that team commit and report on a regular basis creates a document that's kind of living and active. Thanks.
Yep. Thanks, Ron. And I just want to thank everybody online. The questions are coming in and we appreciate it. We're trying to get to as many of them as possible. Rest assured that no matter what, if we run out of time at the end, we will be answering not only the questions that we received in advance, but the remaining questions that were submitted online. One way or another, we'll either do an extended second version of this in coming weeks, or we'll go ahead and email those responses to you. Okay. Is it possible to update the CTPAT profile information before the start of the 90-day period? Yes, you can update your security profile at any time. And you should do this if you have something significant to update out of the normal cycle. And in cases like that, you'll definitely want to notify your supply chain security specialist that you've made some changes. And typically it's only going to be in one or two sections of the security profile. And then that way they can go ahead and review those changes immediately and approve those updated sections. So yes, you can do that. And the program likes to see you do that for any significant changes. Ron, how often should we review and update our manufacturer security profiles?
So I'll say the same thing. You want to have a relationship where really the review isn't something you initiate, but they initiate on their behalf, keep you advised on a continual basis, as opposed to say, okay, and I've seen this working with companies where we're getting ready for the validation. They get everybody in a room and say, okay, what's changed? And then we have a mad dash to update the profile versus, hey, if we have our business partners and manufacturers submit on a continual basis. We've had refitted our plant of our access controls. We moved facilities. Those are monumental things. So encouraging those entities and the appropriate SME to give you advance notice to let you know on a proactive basis, a continual basis, is always the best way to go.
Thank you. Brad, over to you for this one. What area of CTPAT compliance is most frequently underdeveloped or neglected by organizations?
Yeah, sure. And Sean, you touched on some of this earlier in your responses, right? But the just failure to have supporting documentation, procedures to evidence compliance with the minimum security criteria, the sub-criteria, sealing procedures lacking, risk assessment, either not having a risk assessment in place or just being all over the place and not being focused on that movement of cargo from the point of stuffing to the arrival in the US, not identifying dwell times, not identifying logistics partners, business partners, questionnaires. We've touched on that. That certainly comes to mind. Cameras. Remember, cameras, you don't have to use cameras, CCTV, but if you do, that triggers a certain set of specific requirements that you need to comply with. So I would certainly tell companies, if you haven't done so and you're using CCTV, kind of focus on what CTPAT expects of you in that regard. And then just education and training, not communicating in writing or being able to articulate your overall training program, right? Do you have a policy in place? Let's see it. What's your annual training plan? And how do you break it down for all employees versus specialized positions? Those are some points that come to mind.
Great, thank you. Ron, policies and procedures are updated as needed. Is it imperative that written procedures be updated annually, even if there's no updates? For example, MSC 4.6, is it a must that cybersecurity policies and procedures be updated annually or only when necessary? I know you kind of just touched on this, but maybe it just goes a little bit further, I think, this question. So if you could just address that.
Yeah, no, we did. Remember what we talked about. The baseline is annual review. It doesn't say that annual review has to make changes. You may review an SOP or document or your cyber policy. It's all still valid. There are no changes. Part of your annual review may be no changes to the overarching SOP. That's fine. But there has to be an annual review. One of the more important things, too, is that annual review should have some kind of documentation supporting it was completed, whether it's a dated SOP or manual or a work ticket or something showing that, hey, even though there weren't any changes to our IT policy, which is usually a massive document, the review was conducted on this date and no changes were made. So it's acceptable not to have any changes, but it's very much important that the documentation proves that an audit was conducted, an annual review was conducted.
Okay, thank you. Another one for you, Ron. How can I know if the answer needs a document attached?
Yeah, I already said it earlier, and I can't emphasize this enough. If it's not documented, it doesn't exist. If you say we do this, we do annual reviews, we do audits, we do a check of our alarm system. If there's no documentation proving those checks are done, it doesn't exist in the eyes of CTPAT. So for your answer, it's essential that if there's any documentation at all, SOP, memorandum, directive, email, something documentable that shows whatever that functionality is or that policy, it must be included. Again, so many validations we've run into where, oh yeah, we've been doing this, but there isn't anything to prove it. And remember, that's what this exercise is. It's proving that what you have in place is, valid. There's evidence of implementation.
Thank you. I'll take this one. When completing CTPAT annual audits, does CTPAT prefer multiple examples of requirements or just a single document? So unfortunately, this is one of those. It depends on your supply chain security specialist answers. But I would say that if you have two samples to share, that is almost always going to be fine. So that would be my recommendation. I'm going to move forward to CTPAT portal topic here. Why does the CTPAT portal show that a trusted trade partner is a certified member when they're actually validated? So that's a great question. And I do not know the exact reason for why it happened this way, but somebody, probably a programmer at the time, just made that decision to just capture that status as being certified. So technically speaking, when you're looking at the SVI, it says certified. That could be certified or certified validated, depending on where that company is in the process. But That's the answer. It's not a great answer, but somebody just never made it certified validated for whatever reason, so it doesn't align appropriately. Perhaps that's something that CTPAT can update and when they make changes. My account to log into the CTPAT portal was suspended because I didn't log in for 45 days. How can I recover it? Yeah, that was a huge problem when it first started happening. We had a lot of users getting deactivated and their access, they were being locked out of the system. Basically, the way to resolve that is to contact your supply chain security specialist, and in a matter of a few seconds, they can go in and reactivate you. Now, if for some reason you don't have your supply chain security specialist contact information, you can contact the CBP Technology Service Desk. And after this session, we'll go ahead and provide several links and other information that we've mentioned today. So there's an email and there's a phone number for the Technology Service Desk. Okay, moving on to transportation, physical security. What do you consider the minimum security measures that a CTPAT member should have if they stage cargo overnight? So the MSC here states when cargo is staged overnight or for an extended period of time, measures must be taken to secure the cargo from unauthorized access. This connects to so many of the MSC sections, such as access controls, so limiting who can access where that cargo is staged, physical security, creating a secure space through things like fencing, CCTV, guards, alarms, etc. Training, so the staff are aware of the requirements and how to secure that cargo, and also how to report any issues that come up. So really just making sure that all of those different MSC that connect to this issue of staging cargo overnight are being adhered to. Brad, what is the best way to dispose the broken or used bolt seals? And there's a second question here. Does the IPPC ISPM 15 specifically accept mold levels on WPM? Sorry, it's a little funny written
Sure.
there. Hopefully you
Sure.
get it.
Yeah, regarding broken used seals, a good method that I've seen in place is companies at the facility, they'll have a Gaylord bin, it's sealed, there's an aperture and opening where only you can put things in, but you can't take the seals out because you want to control that. You don't want to just dispose of them in a garbage bin or a dumpster where anybody can get access to it. And then periodically, you're going to empty it. A lot of times companies will send it for recycling. They'll document that it's been destroyed, or you could destroy it in-house, right? There are a couple of methods to go about it, but that's what I've seen. And then with respect to wood pallets and mold, I did a little research kind of beforehand here. My understanding is ISPM does not specify acceptable mold standards in any way. By heat treating, chemically treating the pallets, that should reduce the likelihood of mold, but the two are not linked. So that's about as far as I could take that question, Sean.
No worries. Thank you. Has a contaminated shipment ever been detected at the border that affected a CTPAT certified company? When the question asks contaminated, at least the way I'm reading it, I'm thinking, has there ever been contraband in the container? I don't know. Perhaps this is agriculture, but regardless of what it is, yes, happens more times than I care to count. I think all of us here could share horror stories about this, right? Unfortunately, while CTPAT requirements do reduce the risk for those companies, it does not protect them 100%. Nothing's 100%, right? But this is one of the reasons why CTPAT companies are required to monitor their CTPAT business partners in the portal through that SVI function, because when that status changes, it can mean that it has been suspended due to a security incident. So you're going to need to take whatever appropriate actions you need to take if that's one of your business partners, or it's a business partner handling one of your shipments. So yes, it does happen. And I'm just going to kind of connect to one of the questions that came in. I think somebody asked about multiple notifications from Schenker from SVI this morning. And they said, well, I looked into it and there's no issues. Yes, there are no issues. So if you received that message this morning from the portal about if you have if your business partner is Schenker, it's been resolved. There was no issue in terms of security or their status changing in a negative way. So just anybody listening that's been affected by that, you are okay. Recommendations when there is an incident, a shipment compromise that threatens security. So this is why you're required to have those reporting protocols in place. And this is gonna vary depending on the situation completely. But certainly things like isolating that container or that trailer, investigating what's happened, notifying business partners, in some cases calling 911 immediately, calling the CBP hotline to report it, notifying your supply chain security specialist. I know that's always in there, the notifying supply chain security specialist, and it is important. But if we're talking about an emergency type of situation, then there's a lot of other people that you need to be notifying before the supply chain security specialist. But absolutely, they need to be notified at some point in that process. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump on that one. No, everybody's fine. All right. Brad, and I think I saw something in the chat in the Q&A about this as well. So modernization of ISF 10+2 clearly defined 24 hours prior to departure from first foreign POL, not last foreign POL. Can you take that one, Brad?
Yeah, sure. And Mike, again, feel free to tag team, on this question as well, given your seaport experience. And it does jive with a comment here from Miss Flynn. Probably may have been from the same, been from you as well. But it's kind of a statement more than a question. But the statement is correct, right? The importer security filing must be submitted at least 24 hours before the cargo is laden aboard a vessel at the first foreign port of lading, not the last. That deadline is tied to the first port is cargo is loaded, and not that later transshipment point, right, as you point out. And why is that? Well, that's because CBP, through the National Targeting Center, is assessing risk, and if that container needs to be offloaded, needs to be offloaded sooner or later in coordination with the Container Security Initiative folks in host countries. And I think the comment in the chat was this needs to be modernized, or there needs to be some enforcement because companies aren't doing it at the first port of lading. Good point. That's something to bring up in forums. As we have internal chats with CBP colleagues, we can certainly bring it up, right? This seems to be on the mind of the trade. But I'll leave it at there, Mike, unless you have anything else you want to add from your experience.
No, you're absolutely correct, Brad. And I also want to go back to one other thing that Brad covered when it comes to the seals and such. I always made my supply chain specialists walk the loading dock at the distribution center to look around for used seals that have been cut and just dropped down, from the loading dock and stuff. You have to make sure that any part of the seal, not just the serial number part, even the part where it's cut with nothing, you've got to make sure those are collected and either recycled, destroyed. Anything like that can be used, that they'll cannibalize and try to create, they don't always create the greatest duplicate, but if it's on there and somebody's really not paying attention, well, there's a seal on there, it's good to go. But that is one of the main things that I saw through the years whenever there was a security compromise was cannibalized parts being used. And I don't mean just in the sea environment, also in the air environment. You know, we had to really push one catering company in the aviation industry to when a food cart was bad, they just threw it out back into a junk pile. And we had instances where trafficking organizations were taking those mutilated carts and cannibalizing them and creating new carts with false bottoms and putting them back into circulation instead of being destroyed. So, great point Brad made about recycling, but no matter what, there has to be a process in place to make sure there is no chance for someone to reutilize and to compromise you.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. How can I justify when security cameras had a mishap? So bear with us because some of these questions we had to sort of guess on exactly what it was. So it's a little unclear, but when you have CCTV, you must ensure that you're testing it and you're repairing it as necessary. Security test technology needs to be tested on a regular basis to ensure that it's working properly. That's what CTPAT wants to see. And the general guidelines to follow are test that security system after any service work and during and after any major repairs or modifications. And this is systems components may have been compromised unintentionally, during some of that, some of that work. Test the security systems after any major changes to phone or internet services. So in terms of the connectivity, it could have caused a issue with the communications. And anything that may affect the system's ability to communicate with a monitoring center should you have that service as well. So just kind of apply some common sense there to the process. Now, any of those things that you're doing, again, you want to document that so that you can prove that to CBP or CTPAT when they come out to visit. Let's switch over to training and awareness. Brad, how can I get other departments involved in the CTPAT program?
Yeah, certainly. And, talking with points of contact for the CTPAT program one-on-one, I realize it's a challenge for you. You're the quarterback, you're the point guard distributing the ball throughout your organization, but getting the other departments on board always a challenge, right? So I get the question. They've got their own priorities. Um, it starts with leadership from the top down, right? The CEO, security managers need to communicate through the organization. This is a must do. Everybody has to do their part. It's important for our company, our image, brand, and our compliance with the CTPAT program. So you need that somebody covering your back, right? So get your leadership on board. If you're not getting cooperation, point it out to them, right? Hey, we're delinquent in these areas, and if we don't follow through on our commitment, we're going to be suspended or perhaps removed, and that's going to create a whole series of issues for us within the company. And then I would try to focus on the positive, right? As point of contact, compelling messages that you, the security team, the director can get across. There can't be a single point of failure. Security is everybody's responsibility within the organization. Trying to build up that security culture within the organization. And then you take it in small steps, right? Tactics for training, right? Visual reminders, maybe a little bit of shock and awe, right? If we are contaminated, this is what's going to happen to our company. And contamination, contraband found in containers, certainly occurs. You think about your training for new employees and incorporating security awareness in there, and then your specialized training as well. You want to make sure you're covering all of the basics that CTPAT requires for training. And of course, that it's being updated annually. Tough challenge for the point of contact to do that, but take it in manageable steps, get your management support behind you, and then just a little bit of cheerleading too, right? For the other departments to get them on board. But if you bring them together as a team, usually things work out. Over to you, Sean.
Another one for you, Brad. I would like information about creating a 30-minute training video about CTPAT for my company.
Yeah, that's a great idea, and I have seen that. Certainly, if you're a CTPAT member, in the portal, there's a few videos that are already there that you may want to think about incorporating into your own video. Get a statement from your bosses, right? Your upper management, the director of security, in that video. I think that's important. And then you want to hit on, the high points, identifying unauthorized access into the facility, access controls, reporting incidents. That video is a good way to visualize for it. And in today's world, a lot of people learn from video, watching the videos that are out there. And then again, I would bring in some of those core messages that I talked about. No single point of failure, see something, say something, brand and asset protection, build all of that in there. But if you're a CTPAT member and you're taking that step, that I know it's going to be a resounding success when you go through a validation. Certainly in the supply chain specialist, that's going to communicate your dedication to the program. Over.
Thanks, Brad. Everybody forgive me. I'm going to try to read Spanish here because we had a question come in Spanish that, at least on my list here, was not translated. So, requerimos un seminario en español, pero presencial lo hay programado. Entrenamiento programado con evidencia un certificado. Brad, I know you understood that. Can you take that one?
Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Sean. Let me answer in English, and then for my colleague, I'll kind of go back over it. But real quick, and it seems like the colleague is asking for a point of contact to provide CTPAT training. You may want to start with your supply chain specialist, see what he or she may be able to help you with, provide. Certainly, attending the CTPAT annual conference is a great way to get training. You can do your own internal training program, right, with your own internal resources, or you can seek some outside advice. All of us here on the call in our work, we have provided basic awareness CTPAT training for companies, and kind of dovetails with some of the earlier comments about your annual security profile review. So feel free to contact us afterwards. Y para mi colega en español, si usted está buscando más información tocante capacitación, qué bueno, comuníquese con su especialista a ver qué pueden proporcionar a usted, asistir a las conferencias de CTPAT. Usted puede hacer su propio capacitación, ¿verdad? O si quiere, se puede comunicar con nosotros, con CT Strategies, después de este webinario, y podemos explorar oportunidades. Sean, there you go.
Gracias. All right, Brad, I have another one over to you. I'll give you a break. I'm new to CTPAT. What materials can I read to have a thorough understanding?
Yeah. Well, great for trying to get yourself up to speed, right? And there's a lot of information out here. And, you're always a little reluctant to refer folks to websites, but in this case, I would. I would refer you to the CTPAT website. There's a tear sheet, kind of a one-on-one. It's a 5-minute read. Take a look at that. And it's on the external website, certainly. CT Strategies assisted the government a few years back, CTPAT, through a study in conjunction with the University of Houston. Talks about the program, feedback from members, that is available, I think, both on the CT Strategies website, but it's also within CTPAT as well. And then finally, once you've kind of covered those areas, the next place I would point you, look at the CTPAT minimum security criteria for, let's just say, importers. It's a more extensive document, but that's going to give you a lot of tactical, detailed information. What's required, criteria by criteria, sub-criteria by sub-criteria. That's what I got for you, Sean.
Thanks, Brad. How often should a company perform regular security awareness training for employees? Short answer, annually is fine. Obviously, you're going to have different types of training, different types of employees that may need training at different intervals. But in terms of general security awareness for all employees, annually is absolutely fine. What are recommended CTPAT annual training courses? Well, most companies have an annual training schedule based on position, et cetera. And many of those will satisfy some of the MSC, like cybersecurity. Typically, you find almost all companies are doing some type of training related to cybersecurity and testing the system and sending out phony phishing emails, et cetera. Specifically to CTPAT, you want to at least provide general security awareness training to all of your staff. It's not uncommon during a validation for the supply chain security specialists as they're walking through a facility to just stop and ask a couple questions of just any employee that they pass. I've seen that happen. I've done it myself. And you can get a very quick understanding of how well the company is administering general awareness training or specific training, depending on who they decide to ask and what they decide to ask. Okay, a little transition here to AEO, mutual recognition type topics. Brad, and I think we got this same question in the chat. How can we verify Mexico OEA certifications?
Yeah, I noticed the question in the chat too, and I think the both go hand in hand here. I had to do a little bit of research and talk to some business contacts here. I guess my starting point, probably not the answer you want to hear from a colleague, is Mexican government, SAT, they do not have a publicly available directory that lists all of their AEO or OEA in Spanish certified companies. So there's nowhere you can go directly online to do so. Now, I have seen in working with a company, and this was a transportation US Mexico highway carrier in Mexico. And basically what they got was from their business partner and a CUSE. Basically, it's a document issued by SAT, very official looking. It's got a digital timestamp on there, watermark, and that was provided as support of the OEA status. And of course, the company I was working with then just used that for an example of its supporting documentation. But bottom line, you're going to have to contact the company, ask them to provide you something. And then if you have suspicion that it's not valid, you're going to have to play that, just on a case by case basis. But the documents that I've seen issued by SAT, very official looking digital stamp. You should be able to detect if it's been compromised in any sort, or if it looks like somebody just invented a certificate to provide to you.
Yeah.
That's what I got for you, Sean.
Thanks. I've also seen cases, and this is definitely not advertised much by the program, but I have seen where companies reach out to the supply chain security specialists and they say, hey, we have this business partner in Japan. They say they're in the AEO program. Can you verify that for us? Because they do, on the CTPAT side, have the ability to go in to their various systems for tracking MRA partners, and they can go in and actually check to see if that is a partner that's certified in that program. So that's another avenue. And then the answer to the next question is going to be similar, but probably a little better received. So any experience with CTPAT EU Mutual Recognition Registration Portal? It asks for our entity's AEO certification information. So question's a little unclear, but yes, the EU has a public portal for AEO members, so anyone can look them up. And you don't need their number to look them up. You just can put in the name of the company and it'll come up to, it'll pull the records of where they're registered. We will send out that link as part of the follow-up information after this webinar. How is CTPAT, how is the CTPAT program different from AEO? What is the legal basis for a program like CTPAT? Brad, over to you for that one.
Right. The legal basis for CTPAT, and it was codified in the 2006 Safe Port Act. Still a voluntary program, but it had its place codified in law in the Safe Port Act. So that's the legal basis. And if I were to zoom out a little bit, CTPAT, other AEO programs, all kind of operate generally under the World Customs Organization safe framework standards. WCO realized that, programs like CTPAT, AEO, becoming more and more popular, useful for host country administration. So there's a framework of standards that need to be followed by all AEO companies. So generally speaking, CTPAT minimum security criteria sync up with those Safe Port Act, the framework standards. And I guess the best way I would kind of try to explain this, and I've worked with a company in Mexico, OEA in Mexico, and of course CTPAT. And when you look at things such as container inspections, training and awareness, information technology, all very, very similar. There may be nuances, there may be differences, but generally speaking, they're going to follow or require the same basic information. So I guess that kind of where I would start with that question. And then, of course, that kind of leads to, well, does one support the other? And generally it does. More and more companies looking to leverage CTPAT, AEO status, a part of their broad network of, for a multinational corporation of facilities across the world. So being in an AEO program supports your CTPAT membership and vice versa. I'll stop there. There's a lot. Sean, I know you've got a lot of experience with AEO as well. We could go a little further, but generally speaking, that's how I go about it.
No, thank you. And yeah, I don't think there's a need to expound on that, considering we have all these other questions to get to, but thank you. So next one here, I'll do my bad Spanish again. ¿Con qué países hay acuerdos de reconocimiento mutuo? So which countries are there mutual recognition arrangements with? I'm not going to go through the list here. There are currently 19 mutual recognition arrangements that the U.S. has with other countries. And that full list and the dates of those, when those agreements were reached, are all available on the CTPAT CBP website. And again, that'll be another link that we send to you after this session. Can you compare CTPAT with AEO, PIP, and other government supply chain security programs, identify best practices, highest standards for global supply chain securities programs and operations? This is a very detailed response if I'm going to do it the right way. So I am going to exercise my right as the moderator of this session to skip this one and answer it after the fact, because I have a lot of information here that I pulled together for this response. And I just want to be respectful of so many people on the line with so many other questions. And I'd rather get to as many questions as possible. So whoever asked this, you will be receiving this detailed response after the session, if you forgive me for that. All right. Merging, consolidating accounts. Advice on harmonizing consolidating three separate Tier 3 CTPAT accounts into a single CTPAT account. Can you provide details if needed? So yes, you can consolidate accounts. So importers are the best example because you can stack multiple IORs in one account. The risk to doing this, well, the pro to doing this is you only have one account, right? So it's just one thing to manage. You don't have to manage three separate accounts and potentially three separate offices and supply chain security specialists, which unfortunately we see that. So if you consolidate them all under one, then that gives you the ability to reduce kind of the administrative burden related to that. The con is that if you were to experience some sort of issue that resulted in suspension of your CTPAT account and associated benefits, it would now affect all of those IORs. Had they remained separate, then it would affect only that account that was impacted. So that's just something you have to be aware of. Now you also have to be aware of that if the accounts are different business entity types, they cannot be merged. So you cannot merge, even if it's the same parent company, the same exact policies and procedures, you can't merge an importer account and a highway carrier account, or a highway carrier account and a broker account. The system will not let you do that. And the reason it will not let you do that is because there are slightly different requirements for each business entity type. So you just have to be aware of that. This is absolutely something that if you're interested in doing it, you can reach out directly to your supply chain security specialist and have a conversation, let them know what the situation is, and they can advise what the best path forward is. We have done that several times with several companies over the last few years. And so it's a common enough thing that happens. And CTPAT does have awareness and a process to support that. Brad, how is the amalgamation of businesses affected when one company has been a CTPAT member for years, but the rest are not?
Yeah, this question in my mind goes hand in hand with what you just explained, Sean. So, and I'm not going to repeat that, but I think as a kind of a starting point for this, you want to assess and confirm that the different business units are following the same security procedures and it's documented. And if not, identify the gaps and correct. What I've seen is larger multinational corporations, multiple facilities, they'll create overarching corporate security SOP guidelines, for instance, physical security, and then they'll push it out to their facilities, and then their facilities will use that as a starting point to create their own local internal policies and SOPs, but all following the corporate guidelines or standards. But if you have one business unit that is just operating out of bounds or not doing anything vis-a-vis your account, that's an issue, right? Because I'll just use as an importer partner, the expectation is you are pushing out the minimum security criteria to all of your business units and that they are following the CTPAT criteria. Sean?
Thanks. Shifting over to 3PL. When will non-asset-based 3PL entity types be added to CTPAT? I think this question is talking about the upcoming pilot to do this. So there's not an upcoming official access for non-asset based, but there is a pilot that's about to come out. And the answer to when that's going to happen is any day now. And we have a link that we'll share to the Federal Register where you can take a look every morning to see when it's coming out. We have been checking every day and we're monitoring that, and we will certainly be sending out a message via all of our platforms when that happens. So any day now. I don't know if the shutdown is impacting any of the required approvals for that. It seems like it is because I think this was supposed to come out in the first week of October. So just stay tuned for that, and we'll share that link. Who in the supply chain should be validated to use fast lane, and who should only be certified? You guys correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe there's two different formulas, one for the northern border and one for the southern border. For the southern border, has to be a certified importer, a certified manufacturer, a validated highway carrier, and a fast driver to use the fast lane. For the northern border, certified importer, certified carrier, and a approved fast driver to use the fast lane. So that is the formula, unless anybody thinks differently. Ron, for 3PLs, this question's a little wonky here, so bear with me. For 3PLs, have one or three or all be licensed and or etc. and already be actively handling international cargo.
Yeah, so the criteria is asking for proof that your company is licensed and or bonded. However, normally most companies have both. And then as far as the second part, actively, you must be actively engaged in cross-border operations, not anticipating, not going to be. You have to be engaged currently. Part of that history of cross-border activity will be used in determining your eligibility.
Thanks, Ron. And for everybody online, Ron's not going to appreciate that I say this, but it's fun. So Ron is the poor soul that had to actually write the 3PL criteria and eligibility. So all of your complaints about how muddy those requirements are, go to Ron May here on the line. So when our 3PL uses a subcontracted drayage company for help, what documents should our 3PL give them to ensure CTPAT compliance?
Yeah, so if you read the criteria closely, CTPAT does not look favorably upon subcontracting or double brokering. Actually, in the 3PL eligibility criteria, bullet number 3 specifically says against that. If it does occur, the selection process should reflect what we just talked about with criteria. Does the entity you're engaging have a CTPAT certification or AEO certification? Are they licensed and bonded? And making sure that you have proof of that. Making sure too to understand, no matter how much double brokering or subcontracting is done and who eventually handles the load, the accountability is going to come back to the original entity. So if something goes wrong within that supply chain and within that movement, the original entity, the original 3PL, for example, is going to have to be accountable for a seizure or whatever happens. So again, making sure that you identify the legitimacy of that partner, what their benefits are, and understanding the risk that's taken by such activity.
Thanks, Ron. And I see that attendees are answering some of their own questions or some of their colleagues' questions, and that's wonderful. And you guys hold a lot of great information as well. So thank you for doing that. How do you integrate the 5-step risk assessment process into your supply chain security program? So first of all, I think something that gets misunderstood and probably also explained or mispromoted by the program is that the CTPAT 5-step risk assessment process is a recommended process for risk assessment. Many companies have a comprehensive risk assessment process in place that maps to or aligns with CTPAT's 5-step risk assessment process. So don't think that you have to throw away what you already do and start brand new with the 5-step risk assessment process that CTPAT recommends. If your process is already comprehensive and is answering all of those questions that CTPAT wants to see you answer. So, questions like, what is your flow of goods or cargo? That's that mapping piece. How do you identify risks or threats in your supply chain? So the threat assessment against open source information about the supply chain routes, the countries that it's moving through, the operations where they're located. It is safe and secure. So a vulnerability assessment, and that also goes to your own processes and procedures. And how have you mitigated and identified any of those vulnerabilities through an action plan. And then, of course, all these steps need to be documented and established as your process. So hopefully that answered that question. Is it sufficient for CTPAT to conduct a risk analysis based on its 5-step guide, or does it require the use of an additional tech? So the question's a little unclear, but the answer is, if you follow the CTPAT recommended 5-step risk assessment process, that should absolutely fulfill the requirement. That's what they recommend. That's what a lot of companies use, and it's comprehensive, and there should be no additional steps that you need to take unless I'm missing something in the question. Moving on to trade compliance. Ooh, we're running 5 more minutes here. Okay, we're almost done though. So I think I can say right now that we won't need to do a part 2 of this, and we'll be able to provide the balance of the questions and answers via email after the session. But let's get a couple more done here. Trade compliance tier 3. Brad, if my profile was submitted and under revision, when should I update the launch trade compliance for my next anniversary date?
Yeah. Quick answer here. Your security profile anniversary date, it's based on the date your company was accepted into the CTPAT security program. And that's going to trigger the annual profile update. Trade compliance anniversary date is the date your company was accepted into the trade compliance program. And your anniversary date will be based upon that. So you're going to have 2 anniversary dates. And unless you did both at the same time, they're probably going to be 2 dates. I suspect for this question, Sean, there might be a little bit of confusion. For a company that is only participating in CTPAT security, there would be no reason to do the launch CTPAT trade compliance unless you were participating in that program, right? So kind of we need more context to answer the question, but that's how I would kind of start with the answer there.
Thank you. Can you speak more to best practices to attain and or keep CTPAT tier 3? Is the importer not allowed any findings? I think they mean if you had actions required or recommendations, would you lose tier 3? Not necessarily, right? It would depend. I'll say this: most validations result in some recommendations because that's part of the job of the supply chain security specialist. It doesn't mean that you were deficient. An action required is different. So if it was an action required that was in a particular area that was of concern that could lead to a security incident, then it could impact your tier 3 status. Ultimately, the best practices must meet 5 criteria that CTPAT has established. So senior management support, innovation, documented process, checks and balances, and evidence of implementation. And CTPAT has guidance for this, and we will share a link to that document as well. Ultimately, it comes down to the supply chain security specialist and their observations during the validation process, and also the certification and security profile process as well, in terms of identifying those best practices. I always recommend to companies to take stock of the best practices that you think you've implemented and make sure to highlight those during the validation or during your security profile submission, because it's just good to point their attention to these processes. Don't just necessarily wait for them to identify them. Make sure that you're being proactive. Let's see here, 2:29. I think I'm going to stop so I can wrap up on time. We really only have just a handful of questions and answers left, so that's fantastic. There's probably a handful of unanswered questions that are still on the Q&A on the chat. We will address all of those, and we will provide you in about a week. We will provide you with the recording of this session, so that you can use it as necessary for training or whatever you need. We will provide you with, as I said, all of those links that were mentioned throughout this session. And we will provide you with the balance of the questions and answers that we did not get to. But I want to thank my co-presenters here. I want to thank our colleague Hallie, hiding behind the CT Strategies banner there, for making sure everything's working smoothly. And I want to thank everybody that submitted questions prior to the event and submitted questions while we were holding the webinar and being interactive. And we really appreciate it. We hope this was valuable, and we look forward to seeing you again on future webinars. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.